This is David Mould. I'm reading from my book, Postcards from Stanland, Journeys in Central Asia. This excerpt is entitled Soviet Gerrymandering. When the Soviet cartographers sliced and diced Central Asia in the 1920s, someone must have said, "The Kyrgyz, aren't they all nomads? Let's give them the mountains." Before the Soviet era, there were no national borders between the peoples of the region, and identity was defined by religion, family, clan, and place. The Soviets feared that muddled loyalties could help Islamic, social, or political movements gain popular support. Educated Central Asians and religious leaders still talk privately of a Greater Turkestan or a Central Asian Caliphate. The Soviets attempted to counter pan-Islamic and pan-Turkic tendencies by constructing nationalities, giving each a defined territory with national borders, along with a ready-made history, language, culture, and ethnic profile. Your loyalty was no longer to your tribe, village, or faith, but to your nationality as a Kazakh, Kyrgyz, Tajik, Turkmen, or Uzbek, and to its Soviet Socialist Republic, or SSR. The Uzbek and Turkmen SSRs were created in 1924, the Tajik SSR in 1929. It took the Russians longer to sort out the Kazakhs and the Kyrgyz, who share similar physical features, traditions and language. Indeed, in the 19th century they were all referred to as Kyrgyz. As ethnographic research began to reveal differences, the mountain tribes became known as Kara Kyrgyz, Black Kyrgyz, to distinguish them from the steppe-dwelling Kazakhs, who were called simply Kyrgyz because Kazakh sounded too much like the name of another group, the Cossacks. Although the Russians seemed confused, the Kazakhs knew perfectly well who they were and that they were not Kyrgyz. They were members of a tribe that was part of either the Great, Middle, or Little Horde, each of which had its own Khan or king. In 1926, most of present-day Kyrgyzstan became the Kara Kyrgyz Autonomous Soviet Socialist Republic, and a full Kyrgyz SSR in 1936. In the same year, the Kazakh SSR was formed. And so, through the miracle of Soviet ethnic engineering, the Kara Kyrgyz were no longer black, but true Kyrgyz, while the people who had been called Kyrgyz for more than a century turned out to be Kazakhs after all. While promoting new national loyalties, the Soviets realized that too much nationalism could be dangerous. In a parallel effort to solidify control, they shifted around ethnic groups to ensure that none was dominant in a specific area. Thousands of Central Asians were moved to other parts of the Soviet Union. Russian and Ukrainian farm and factory workers were settled in Central Asia, while Volga Germans, Chechens, Koreans, and other ethnicities were deported to the region. The policy of divide and rule, intended to suppress ethnic unrest and militant Islam, created artificial borders between ethnically mixed SSRs. For example, the medieval cities of Samarkand and Bukhara, historically major centres of Tajik culture and with large ethnic Tajik populations, ended up in the Uzbek SSR. The city of Osh in southern Kyrgyzstan, the first place I worked in Central Asia, was a classic case of ethnic gerrymandering. As Central Asia scholar Madeline Reeves points out, if the Soviets had drawn boundaries exclusively along national lines, the nomadic Kyrgyz would, quote, end up with a Kyrgyz republic that had no cities of its own, a worrying prospect for a state preoccupied with thrusting, quote, backward populations into Soviet modernity. The solution was to make Osh, with its predominantly Uzbek population of traders and arable farmers, the southern capital of the Kyrgyz SSR. For 3/4 of a century, the internal borders between the SSRs made little difference in the daily lives of people who crossed them for work, school, shopping, or to visit relatives. It was only after the collapse of the Soviet Union, when each SSR became an independent country, that the notional borders became national borders. Independence came suddenly to all Soviet republics. Unlike liberation struggles in Asia and Africa, there was no army emerging from the mountains or jungles to be cheered by flag-waving crowds, no government in exile, no heroes or martyrs to freedom. Citizens of each SSR just woke up one morning in December 1991 to find themselves citizens of an independent country with the artificial borders drawn in the 1920s. You were no longer a Soviet citizen living in the Kazakh SSR, but a citizen of Kazakhstan. In border regions, nomadic families were no longer free to move their herds between winter and summer pastures. Some arable farmers could not reach their wells or found their irrigation ditches cut. Buses stopped at the border, and people could no longer travel easily to visit relatives or trade or shop on the market. Achieving independence is one thing, creating national identity is another. At independence, ethnic Kazakhs were a minority, albeit the largest one in Kazakhstan, making up about 41% of the population. At the same time, almost 1/4 of Tajikistan's population was ethnically Uzbek. With the possible exception of Turkmenistan, all republics have a rich but potentially volatile ethnic mix. The region, noted the New York Times, looked like, quote, a medieval map where power is defined by ethnicities and clans, not by borders. Former U.S. National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski famously referred to Central Asia as, quote, the Eurasian Balkans. Postcards from Stanland, Journeys in Central Asia by David Mould, is published by the Ohio University Press, ohioswallow, that's one word, .com, and available from independent bookstores, Amazon, and other online booksellers.